My HOA president destroyed my century-old family farm with her SUV, so I made sure her next drive would be her last. There she is, Vivian Hartwell, HOA Queen Bee, sitting in her Escalade like a very expensive paperweight. Her pearl-white SUV is buried 3 feet deep in Georgia mud, wheels spinning helplessly while she screams through the window. The sound is beautiful, mechanical frustration mixed with human rage. The smell of diesel mixes with fresh earth, and I can taste the justice. This woman spent 6 months destroying my family farm with lawsuits. She flooded my tomato fields, cost me $8,000, and nearly killed my daughter's wedding fund. So I learned her daily route and prepared a surprise. 6 months of harassment deserved one perfect payback. Those sirens? They're coming for her, not me. Sometimes the best revenge is perfectly legal. What would you do if some HOA queen thought she owned your family land? Drop your worst HOA horror story below and let me know where you're watching from. My name's Dalton Briggs, and this 40-acre slice of heaven has been in my family since 1923. My great-grandfather bought this land during the Depression for $60 and a handshake, back when a man's word meant something and the morning air smelled like possibility instead of lawsuits. 3 generations of Briggs men have worked this red Georgia clay, growing everything from cotton to the organic heirloom tomatoes that now supply half the county's farmers markets. Walk through my fields on a summer morning and you'll hear the satisfying crunch of gravel under work boots, smell the rich earth still damp with dew, and feel the honest weight of soil under your fingernails. This farm isn't just my livelihood, it's my daughter Emma's inheritance and her wedding venue. We'd planned the reception under our century-old oak trees, where 4 generations of Briggs children learned to walk. The farm income was supposed to cover everything: the caterer, the flowers, the dress Emma had been dreaming about since she was 12. Then came Magnolia Springs Estates. 200 McMansions dropped onto pristine farmland like suburban measles. The sales brochures promised country living with urban convenience, which apparently meant living next to actual farmers without tolerating any farming. Each house cost more than my farm's annual revenue, filled with people who wanted the Instagram aesthetic of rural life without the reality. Enter Vivian Hartwell, 48, Connecticut transplant, and walking advertisement for why money can't buy class. This woman elected herself HOA president, faster than you can say property values, and immediately declared war on anything that reminded her new neighbors they'd moved to farm country. Her opening salvo? A formal complaint about my roadside vegetable stand being an aesthetic violation that depresses surrounding property values. Picture this. Vivian drives a pearl-white Escalade that's never touched honest dirt, wears tennis whites to buy milk, and speaks in that special tone rich people reserve for explaining why everyone else is doing life wrong. Her husband represents half the county commissioners through his law firm, which explains her casual relationship with concepts like courtesy and asking permission. The trouble started with our easement road, a narrow gravel strip cutting through my property corner that connects the old county highway to her precious development. Been there since the 1940s for emergency power company access. Previous landowners used it maybe twice yearly, always with advance notice, always respectfully, usually bringing a pie as thanks. Vivian discovered that easement on day 4 of her residency and decided it was her personal expressway to civilization. Why drive 2 extra miles on properly maintained public roads when you can cut through some farmer's inconvenient property? My unpaved farm road was built for occasional maintenance trucks and seasonal harvest equipment, not daily abuse by a 3-ton luxury battering ram. The first morning she roared through at 7 a.m., engine revving unnecessarily. I figured honest mistake. Maybe she was lost. Maybe GPS confused her. The second time, I walked over for what I hoped would be a neighborly conversation about mutual respect and property care. That's when I met Vivian's charming personality in all its glory. "It's my legal right to use this easement," she announced through a barely cracked window, air conditioning blasting while I stood sweating in the Georgia heat. "Perhaps if you maintained your property to proper residential standards, there wouldn't be drainage issues." Proper standards. Lady, I'm growing food that feeds half the county's families. What exactly are you producing besides complaints and carbon emissions? 2 weeks of her daily commute carved deep ruts in my carefully maintained access road. The drainage system my grandfather installed failed completely, flooding my prize heirloom tomato fields every time clouds gathered. 30 years of careful soil management and organic certification work destroyed by one woman's entitlement and German automotive engineering. When I politely requested she consider limiting her easement usage to emergencies, she threatened immediate legal action for harassment of elected HOA officials. When I mentioned the mounting property damage, already $3,000 in lost crops and repair costs, she suggested I contact my insurance company and stop bothering busy people. That moment I realized this wasn't really about road access or convenience. This was about power, control, and one woman's determination to remake the world according to her suburban fantasy. Vivian had decided my century-old family farm was fundamentally incompatible with her vision of gentrified rural perfection, and she was systematically planning to remove that obstacle one lawsuit, one complaint, and one tire rut at a time. 3 days after our charming conversation, Vivian fired her first real shot. A certified letter arrived from the county planning office, the thick manila envelope crackling ominously between my calloused fingers. Somebody had filed a formal complaint about agricultural nuisances and potential environmental violations on my property. The smell of official bureaucracy mixed with my morning coffee as I read through 12 pages of legal accusations that basically boiled down to farmer bad, development good. According to the complaint, my farm's irrigation runoff allegedly violated residential water quality standards. My composting operation supposedly created hazardous biological waste conditions. Apparently, these people had never seen actual fertilizer before. Even my weekend corn maze, a family tradition that brought joy to hundreds of kids each fall, was flagged as an unpermitted commercial entertainment facility operating in violation of zoning regulations. County Inspector Jim Martinez called me that afternoon, his voice tight with the frustration of a man forced to investigate nonsense. "Dalton, I've known your family 30 years. This complaint is garbage, but my hands are tied. I have to investigate every allegation." He paused, and I could hear him choosing words carefully. "You should know this came through unusual channels. Somebody with serious connections fast-tracked this to my desk with a note about priority review for public safety concerns." The inspection was scheduled for peak harvest season naturally. Nothing like shutting down farm operations during the 2 weeks that determine your entire year's income. I spent 3 days documenting every irrigation line, every compost bin, every blade of grass on my property. The paperwork alone cost me $400 in copying and certification fees, money that should have gone toward Emma's wedding flowers. Meanwhile, Vivian escalated her daily harassment campaign with the precision of a military operation. Her morning commute now included deliberate acceleration through the muddiest sections of my access road, spinning tires with unnecessary aggression while classical music drifted from her open windows. The woman had somehow weaponized her daily drive to work, turning vehicular vandalism into an art form. That's when I remembered something my brother-in-law mentioned during deer season last year, how trail cameras had helped him catch the teenagers stealing from his hunting cabin. I'd thought it was overkill at the time, but desperate situations call for digital solutions. These cameras provide legally admissible evidence in property disputes because they create date and time-stamped records that no lawyer can argue with. I positioned them carefully on my own property, angled to capture license plates and driver behavior without trespassing on anyone else's land. The cameras revealed Vivian's true pattern within days. She wasn't just using the easement for convenience. She was conducting psychological warfare with German engineering. Morning commute at 7 a.m. sharp with unnecessary engine revving that echoed across my sleeping fields. Lunch hour, inspection tours, bringing HOA friends to gawk at the problematic agricultural situation like tourists viewing a zoo exhibit. Weekend garden club meetings that involved caravans of luxury SUVs churning up my road during farmers market hours. The worst part? She'd started timing these invasions to maximize disruption with surgical precision. Saturday morning convoys arrived precisely when my customers pulled up for fresh produce, creating traffic jams that cost me sales. Sunday afternoon tire spinning exhibitions happened during my daughter's outdoor wedding planning sessions, drowning out our conversations with the whine of spinning wheels and the smell of burning rubber. 2 weeks later, the county inspection results arrived. 0 violations found. Jim Martinez had done his job honestly, documenting that my farm operations exceeded all environmental standards. But the process had cost me $5,000 in lost revenue from mandatory operational shutdowns, plus legal fees for agricultural compliance consulting. That's when the wedding dress budget evaporated into thin air. Vivian's response to my clean inspection? She filed an appeal within 24 hours, claiming the county had failed to properly investigate obvious environmental hazards and demanding a second inspection by unbiased outside experts. Her husband's law firm sent supporting documentation questioning Inspector Martinez's cozy relationship with local agricultural interests. Standing in my flooded tomato fields that evening, watching thousands of dollars in heirloom varieties rot in standing water created by her tire ruts, I finally understood the game. This wasn't random harassment. This was strategic warfare designed to death by 1,000 cuts my farm into bankruptcy. Every inspection, every legal challenge, every bureaucratic delay cost money I didn't have for problems that didn't exist. The community started fracturing along predictable lines. Farmers market vendors complained about muddy customer access caused by easement road damage. The local newspaper ran a story titled "Development versus Agriculture, Progress or Preservation." The coffee shop downtown became Switzerland, where both factions vented frustrations over blueberry muffins and mounting legal bills. My daughter Emma found me that evening, her wedding planning binder tucked under her arm like a shield. "Dad, what if we just sell? Maybe she's right. Maybe this place doesn't fit anymore." Looking at my daughter's worried face, surrounded by 4 generations of family heritage being systematically destroyed by one woman's entitlement and unlimited legal budget, I made a decision. Time to stop playing defense and start playing chess. Playing chess with Vivian turned out to be like wrestling a porcupine, painful, pointless, and guaranteed to leave you bleeding. Her next move arrived via certified mail, the thick envelope landing on my kitchen table with the weight of financial doom. Hartwell, Morrison & Associates letterhead gleamed like a threat, the paper so expensive it probably cost more than my monthly feed bill. The cease and desist letter demanded I immediately stop harassing HOA officials through frivolous complaints and defamatory statements. Apparently, asking someone to drive carefully through your property now constituted legal harassment in Connecticut speak. The audacity was breathtaking, like a burglar suing you for having an inconveniently locked door. They wanted $5,000 in administrative compensation for the HOA's legal expenses, plus immediate cessation of all retaliatory actions against association members. They were billing me for the privilege of being destroyed on my own land. If I hadn't been so terrified, I might have admired the pure gall. But paragraph 3 delivered the real gut punch. Notice of a formal zoning compliance hearing. The County Planning Commission would review whether my farm operations were compatible with evolving community standards in transitioning agricultural areas. Lawyer speak. 4. We're going to legislate you out of existence. The courthouse smelled like old wood polish and broken dreams as I researched their filing. The records clerk, Betty, had known my family since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. She shook her silver head sympathetically while pulling files. "Dalton, honey, they've done their homework. Professional presentation, perfect documentation, all their legal ducks in a row." The hearing materials were corporate-level polished. PowerPoint presentations about property values, traffic impact studies, environmental assessments complete with charts and graphs. This wasn't some angry neighbor throwing a tantrum. This was a coordinated campaign with serious money behind it. That's when I stumbled across something interesting in the public records database. Vivian Hartwell had a history. Back in Connecticut, she'd been involved in identical disputes with 3 different small businesses near her previous residence: a family bakery, an antique shop, and a dog grooming salon. All 3 had eventually sold their properties to Pinnacle Development Corporation, which later built luxury condominiums on the sites. The pattern was surgical: complaints about traffic, noise, property values, environmental concerns. Professional legal pressure applied until small business owners couldn't afford to fight anymore. I wasn't her first victim. I was her 4th conquest in a proven playbook. My hands shook slightly as I photocopied the Connecticut newspaper articles. One quoted Vivian directly: "Sometimes progress requires difficult decisions about incompatible land uses." The same woman, the same words, the same devastating results. I called my cousin Mike, who'd survived 2 tours in Afghanistan and now ran a private security firm. "'Cause I need military-grade surveillance and someone who understands property law warfare." Mike arrived the next morning with equipment that belonged in a spy movie and a business card for Patricia Finley, an agricultural law specialist in Atlanta. "Document everything like your life depends on it," he said, adjusting camera angles with tactical precision. In warfare, superior intelligence wins battles before they're fought. Patricia Finley's law office smelled like leather-bound victory and expensive coffee. She listened to my story with the focused attention of a surgeon planning a delicate operation. "Mr. Briggs, you're experiencing what we call squeeze-out tactics. The goal isn't legal victory, it's making legal defense financially impossible." She leaned forward, eyes sharp with professional interest. "But agricultural operations have federal protections most small business owners never discover. Right to farm laws aren't suggestions, they're criminal statutes with serious penalties for interference." I'd been thinking local zoning dispute when I should have been thinking federal protection violation. Meanwhile, Vivian organized her safety patrol, HOA volunteers with clipboards who documented every farm activity like anthropologists studying a primitive culture. They'd arrive in lawn chairs, positioning themselves along my property line to photograph workers and intimidate customers. The psychological warfare was working perfectly. My family was cracking under the pressure. Emma postponed wedding dress shopping indefinitely. Sarah stopped sleeping through the night, dark circles growing under worried eyes. The legal bills were consuming our savings like fire-eating paper, one attorney consultation at a time. But the cameras were capturing something valuable. Vivian's behavior was escalating beyond property disputes into potentially criminal territory. Late-night drives through the easement with no destination. Deliberately blocking my farm entrance during delivery times. Bringing strangers onto my property to photograph operations without permission. The breaking point came during Emma's birthday party. 20 kids running around our backyard, families enjoying homemade ice cream under century-old oak trees when Vivian's convoy arrived for an impromptu inspection. 6 luxury SUVs crawling through my property at funeral pace, passengers hanging out windows with cameras, deliberately disrupting children's laughter with engine noise and intimidation. That's when Vivian made her first real mistake. Those hidden cameras had just documented intentional harassment of a private family gathering. In agricultural law, terrorizing children crosses the line from property dispute to federal crime. Standing in my kitchen that night, reviewing footage of entitled adults ruining kids' birthday parties, I finally understood the complete game board. Time to flip the table. Vivian's next assault hit like a bureaucratic hurricane. Within 1 week, my mailbox overflowed with official inspection notices from the EPA, Georgia Department of Agriculture, County Health Department, and OSHA. The thick manila envelopes smelled like government ink and impending doom. Someone was trying to bury me in regulatory quicksand. Each agency cited anonymous complaints about alleged violations that would have been hilarious if they weren't so expensive. My organic composting operation suddenly became hazardous biological waste disposal. My weekend corn maze transformed into an unlicensed amusement facility creating public safety risks. Even my farm dog's water bowl was flagged as a potential vector for waterborne pathogens. The creativity was almost artistic, like watching someone paint your destruction in bureaucratic watercolors. The timing was surgical precision. All inspections scheduled during my 3-week harvest window, the only period that determined whether I made money or went bankrupt. Each inspection required costly preparation, soil testing, water analysis, professional documentation of every farming practice dating back to my grandfather's era. The fees alone totaled $8,000, which was supposed to be Emma's entire wedding budget. But Vivian's corporate efficiency contained a fatal flaw. I'd been researching agricultural harassment cases late into the night, learning how farmers in other states had fought similar battles. Turns out federal agricultural protection laws aren't suggestions, they're criminal statutes with real teeth. Coordinating multiple agency complaints against legitimate farming operations isn't just harassment, it's a federal conspiracy with prison time attached. Patricia Finley's voice sharpened when I read her the complaint list over the phone. "Mr. Briggs, this coordination pattern screams organized interference. File simultaneous false complaints with multiple federal agencies, and you've crossed from civil dispute into criminal conspiracy territory." Meanwhile, my trail cameras revealed Vivian's digital warfare campaign. She'd launched Magnolia Springs Safety Concerns, a Facebook group that somehow attracted 400 members in 10 days. Professional quality videos portrayed my century-old farm as an environmental apocalypse, complete with ominous music and editing that made normal farming look like Chernobyl cleanup operations. The propaganda was masterfully crafted, Photos of my irrigation system labeled unregulated industrial runoff, pictures of my heritage compost bins described as biological hazard accumulation, shots of my vintage John Deere presented as heavy machinery endangering residential safety. Each post generated dozens of angry shares from people who thought vegetables grew in grocery stores through spontaneous generation. But the cameras captured something that made my coffee turn cold in my mouth. Late Thursday evening, Vivian escorted strangers onto my property. Not county officials, but people in $1,000 suits carrying surveying equipment and professional cameras. They weren't documenting violations. They were calculating square footage and development potential like sharks measuring a bleeding swimmer. I spent the weekend digging deeper into those Connecticut newspaper archives, following digital breadcrumbs that led to an ugly pattern. Pinnacle Development Corporation hadn't just purchased properties after Vivian's harassment campaigns. They'd been quietly acquiring surrounding parcels months before her first complaint. The family bakery, antique shop, and dog grooming salon weren't random harassment targets. They were strategic obstacles in predetermined development plans. Cross-referencing Georgia property records revealed the terrifying scope. Pinnacle Development had been systematically buying farmland throughout our county for 2 years. Small family operations, generational properties, rural heritage sites, always after prolonged legal disputes with nearby residential communities. Always purchased at distressed prices from financially devastated sellers who couldn't afford continued legal warfare. This wasn't random suburban entitlement. This was organized agricultural elimination, a corporate strategy that had destroyed family farms across 3 states using the same playbook. Plant an HOA operative, manufacture complaints, overwhelm small farmers with legal costs, acquire distressed properties at below-market prices. That's when the sabotage escalated beyond harassment into outright warfare. I discovered my main irrigation system severed in 4 places, flooding my equipment storage and drowning 2 acres of heirloom tomatoes that had taken 3 months to nurture. The cuts were professional, surgical, someone with proper tools and detailed knowledge of agricultural infrastructure. Trail camera footage showed headlights near the irrigation lines around 2 a.m., but the license plate was deliberately obscured with mud. The repair bill hit $6,000, plus replanting costs for destroyed crops. My insurance company started making nervous noises about ongoing neighbor disputes and whether coverage applied to intentional property damage by third parties. Emma found me standing knee-deep in muddy water at sunrise, surveying the destruction of our family's careful work. Her wedding dress fund was literally drowning in Georgia clay, and we both knew it. "Dad, maybe we should just sell to them and start over somewhere else. This fight is killing us." Looking at my daughter's exhausted face, seeing worry lines that shouldn't exist on someone planning their wedding, I almost surrendered. Almost. But then I remembered those development consultants measuring my great-grandfather's legacy like it was just another commodity to be consumed and converted into suburban sprawl. That morning, I made 3 strategic phone calls. First to the private investigator Patricia Finley recommended. Second to the county sheriff about documenting property crimes. Third, to a journalist who specialized in investigating corporate agricultural harassment patterns. Because if Pinnacle Development and their HOA operative thought they could systematically destroy American family farms through organized conspiracy, they were about to discover that some battles are worth fighting, even when the odds look impossible. The breakthrough came from the most unlikely source, 90-year-old Betty at the county courthouse, whose memory contained more legal history than most law libraries. I'd been drowning in easement research for the 4th time that week, surrounded by the musty smell of old filing cabinets and the taste of desperation in my mouth, when Betty shuffled over carrying a dust-covered file box like it contained buried treasure. "Dalton, honey, you've been barking up the wrong tree," she said, her arthritic fingers surprisingly gentle with yellow documents that crackled like autumn leaves. "Your great-grandfather was craftier than a fox in a henhouse. He didn't just buy this land, he bulletproofed it." The original 1923 deed was handwritten in fountain pen ink that had faded to sepia, each letter formed with the careful precision of a man who understood that words on paper could save or destroy a family's future. But the legal language was crystal clear. My great-grandfather had negotiated an agricultural protection clause directly into the easement agreement. In script that looked like calligraphy, It stated that easement rights would be rendered null and void should said access be employed to harass, impede, or interfere with legitimate agricultural operations conducted upon the adjoining property. The man had basically installed a legal landmine with a 90-year fuse. My coffee grew cold as I read the clause 3 times, each reading making the implications clearer. Betty smiled with the satisfaction of someone who'd been waiting decades to drop this particular bombshell. Your great-granddaddy survived the Depression by watching neighbors lose their farms to city lawyers and bank foreclosures. He swore no future generation of Briggs would face that fight defenseless. The protection clause predated modern zoning laws, HOA covenants, and residential development regulations by decades. Under Georgia property law, historical agricultural protections couldn't be superseded by subsequent residential development. They had absolute legal precedence. Vivian's entire harassment campaign wasn't just unsuccessful, it was retroactively illegal. Patricia Finley's voice sharpened to laser focus when I read the clause over the phone. Mr. Briggs, this doesn't just protect you from harassment. This gives you grounds to permanently void their easement rights and sue for federal agricultural interference violations. Your great-grandfather essentially gave you a legal nuclear weapon. But the real devastating detail was what the clause revealed about Vivian's documented behavior. Every trail camera incident, the deliberate tire spinning, the inspection tours, the social media warfare, constituted legal proof of intentional harassment designed to interfere with agricultural operations. She hadn't just been trespassing, she'd been committing federal crimes while thinking she was exercising property rights. Agricultural Protection Clause violations trigger enforcement mechanisms most lawyers never encounter. Each documented harassment incident carried potential fines up to $50,000, plus criminal penalties, including jail time for systematic interference with protected agricultural operations. Vivian had been building her own prison sentence one tire rut at a time. The research painted an even bigger picture. Pinnacle Development's strategy of eliminating problematic farms only succeeded when farmers didn't discover historical protection clauses. In Connecticut and Massachusetts, they'd destroyed dozens of family operations through harassment campaigns. But in 2 cases where farmers found agricultural protection language, Pinnacle had quietly withdrawn and paid 6-figure settlements to avoid federal prosecution. They'd systematically targeted farmers who appeared legally vulnerable, always avoiding properties with known historical protections. This time, they'd picked a fight with a man whose great-grandfather had outmaneuvered the Great Depression and left his descendants a hidden ace in the hole. That evening, I called Emma with news that made her voice break with relief for the first time in months. "Dad, does this mean we can save the farm and still have my wedding here?" Holding that faded document in hands that carried the same calluses as the man who'd signed it, I felt my great-grandfather's presence in the room like a warm embrace across 9 decades. "Emma, sweetheart, we're not just saving your wedding. We're about to give that old fox the last laugh he spent his whole life setting up." The Agricultural Protection Clause transformed my kitchen into a war room that smelled like fresh coffee and righteous anger. Maps covered the table where Emma used to do homework, timelines stretched across walls like battle plans, and file boxes stacked around chairs like legal ammunition. My great-grandfather's faded handwriting had become the blueprint for the fight of our lives. Patricia Finley arrived Monday morning with reinforcements that looked like they'd stepped out of a courtroom drama: environmental lawyer, agricultural rights specialist, and a paralegal whose research skills could embarrass Google. They spread across my living room like generals planning D-Day, examining 3 months of trail camera footage with the intensity of detectives solving a murder. "Mr. Briggs, this documentation is prosecutor's gold," Patricia announced, clicking through videos that showed Vivian's escalating harassment campaign. "Each incident represents a separate federal violation. We're not just voiding easement rights, we're building a criminal case that could put people behind bars where they belong." The evidence cataloging felt like archaeological work, carefully documenting every harassment incident with the precision of scientists preserving artifacts. Mike's military-grade cameras had captured everything: midnight sabotage runs with clear license plates, inspection parades with facial recognition quality, even audio of Vivian instructing HOA members to document every violation of community standards during conversations she thought were private. But building the legal case was only half the strategy. I needed community allies, and that meant education time. Tuesday evening, I invited every farmer within 20 miles to my kitchen for coffee and consciousness raising. The room filled with weathered hands wrapped around steaming mugs and worried faces, lined by decades of honest work under unforgiving sun. "Folks, this isn't about my property dispute," I explained, spreading newspaper clippings from Connecticut and Massachusetts across the table, like evidence of crimes against agriculture. Pinnacle Development has weaponized suburban entitlement into a system for eliminating family farms. They plant operatives in nearby developments, manufacture bogus complaints, overwhelm small farmers with legal costs, then acquire distressed properties at bankruptcy prices. Old Jim Patterson, whose family had been growing prize-winning peaches since Cleveland was president, squinted at the documents through glasses held together with electrical tape and stubborn determination. "Dalton, you telling us this Connecticut woman's been working for corporate vultures this whole time? That every insult and lawsuit was planned from day one?" "I'm saying we've all been hunted, Jim. Check your property records. I guarantee Pinnacle's been circling every farm in this room like buzzards waiting for roadkill." The silence that followed was thicker than August humidity. These men had spent lifetimes building agricultural legacies, and they were just realizing those legacies were under systematic assassination by corporate predators wearing tennis whites and driving luxury tanks. By Thursday, my kitchen had become unofficial headquarters for what we'd started calling the Agricultural Defense Coalition. Farmers arrived daily with their own horror stories: mysterious environmental complaints, frivolous safety violations, HOA pressure campaigns against legitimate agricultural operations. The pattern was surgical across 15 different properties. Pinnacle Development was conducting agricultural genocide through legal warfare. The smoking gun came when Martha Stevens, who operated the county's largest organic farm, brought a folder thick with private investigation results. Her weathered hands shook slightly as she spread photographs across my table. "Dalton, you need to see what my detective discovered about Pinnacle's real business model." The investigation revealed that Pinnacle Development was actually a subsidiary of Agricultural Transition Solutions, a national corporation that specialized in converting productive farmland into suburban sprawl. Their business model was breathtakingly cynical: identify agricultural regions with development potential, systematically eliminate existing farms through harassment campaigns, acquire distressed properties at fire sale prices, then convert entire food-producing areas into cookie-cutter subdivisions. They'd successfully murdered over 200 family farms across 8 states using identical tactics: plant HOA operatives, manufacture legal complaints, financially exhaust farmers through endless litigation, acquire distressed properties for pennies on the dollar, wash, rinse, repeat, profit. Vivian wasn't some entitled neighbor throwing suburban tantrums. She was a professional agricultural executioner. But knowledge creates power, and historical protection clauses create legal dynamite. Patricia's research had discovered similar agricultural protection language in 6 other county farm deeds. What Pinnacle thought was systematic elimination had actually activated a network of federally protected agricultural operations with enough documented harassment evidence to justify criminal prosecution. The irony was sweeter than my grandmother's peach preserves. By targeting multiple farms simultaneously, Pinnacle had triggered a coordinated federal agricultural interference investigation. Instead of picking off isolated farmers individually, they'd awakened a coalition of legally protected operations with enough evidence to destroy their entire business model. Friday evening, I stood in my kitchen surrounded by maps, legal documents, and the determined faces of farmers who'd decided corporate bullies had pushed too far. The aroma of Emma's fresh cornbread drifted from the oven, a reminder of what we were really defending: the right to feed families instead of feeding developers' bank accounts. My great-grandfather's protection clause hadn't just saved my farm, it had provided the legal framework for protecting every family farm in the county from systematic corporate elimination. "Gentlemen," I announced, raising my coffee mug in salute, "time to teach these corporate parasites that Georgia farmers have very sharp teeth." Vivian's next move revealed just how cornered predators behave when their feeding operation gets disrupted. She materialized at my front door Tuesday morning like a designer-dressed rattlesnake, her pearl-white Escalade gleaming in my driveway while the smell of her expensive perfume clashed with the honest aroma of fresh-turned soil from my morning field work. "Mr. Briggs, I believe we've had some unfortunate misunderstandings," she announced through my screen door, her voice dripping with the kind of syrupy concern that usually precedes a knife between the ribs. The HOA has authorized me to offer a generous resolution. $25,000 for permanent easement rights, plus we'll cover all your recent legal expenses. The audacity was breathtaking. After months of systematic harassment, property destruction, and federal crimes, she was offering to pay me for the privilege of continuing to destroy my farm. It was like a burglar offering to buy your TV after getting caught rifling through your living room. "That's mighty thoughtful, Vivian," I replied, not opening the door while my coffee grew cold in my hand. "But I'm curious, where's a neighborhood HOA getting that kind of cash? Your dues must be higher than membership at Augusta National." Her practiced smile flickered for exactly 1 second, revealing something predatory underneath the suburban soccer mom costume. "Sometimes community improvement requires significant investment, Mr. Briggs. I'm certain a practical businessman like yourself understands the wisdom of avoiding prolonged legal entanglements."
Betty, immunity, child.
The threat was velvet-wrapped but crystal clear. Take our blood money or face financial annihilation through endless litigation. It was probably the same speech Pinnacle had delivered to dozens of farmers before systematically destroying their livelihoods. But this time, they were negotiating with someone who'd read the fine print their lawyers had missed. Within hours, the political pressure campaign launched with the coordination of a military operation. County commissioners received concerned citizen calls about dangerous agricultural operations near family neighborhoods. The local newspaper got anonymous tips about environmental violations at certain problematic farms. State agriculture officials were contacted about unsafe practices requiring immediate intervention. But the real escalation came that evening when someone disabled my primary security cameras during a 3-hour window. My irrigation pump house showed clear signs of attempted break-in, damaged locks, pried door frames, and footprints in the mud that were definitely not made by work boots. Apparently, agricultural sabotage requires better tools than your average suburban criminal typically carries in their tennis bag. The backup cameras I'd hidden as insurance captured footage that turned my blood to ice water. Vivian's Escalade parked strategically across the road while 2 men in dark clothing approached my pump house with crowbars and bolt cutters. They spent 40 minutes trying to access equipment that controlled water flow for my entire operation, essentially attempting to murder my crops through technological strangulation. When direct sabotage failed, they shifted to psychological warfare that would have impressed military interrogators. Anonymous phone calls started arriving at 2 a.m. sharp, heavy breathing, sudden hang-ups, and occasionally whispered suggestions about accidents that happen to farmers who don't know when to quit. My daughter Emma received identical harassment at her apartment, forcing her to stay with friends while mysterious electrical problems made her place temporarily uninhabitable. The character assassination campaign launched simultaneously across every digital platform where rural reputations could be murdered. Online reviews suddenly appeared claiming my organic vegetables were contaminated, my agritourism tours were unsafe for children, and my family had suspicious connections to environmental violations. Each review was crafted with enough specific details to seem legitimate while containing enough poison to destroy decades of careful reputation building. But Vivian's nuclear option arrived disguised as official paperwork. Pinnacle Development filed formal eminent domain proceedings against my property. They claimed my farm constituted a public health hazard requiring government intervention, and proposed mandatory acquisition for residential development serving community welfare. The supporting documentation was professionally lethal. Environmental impact studies that cost more than most people's cars, soil contamination allegations, water quality concerns, air pollution claims from agricultural operations. Every environmental boogeyman that could terrify suburban parents was included with scientific-sounding language and charts that would impress university professors. My private investigator's evening phone call explained the overwhelming nature of their assault. Pinnacle had hired the same public relations firm that helped tobacco companies fight cancer research. Professional disinformation specialists who could make smoking look healthy and healthy farms look like toxic waste sites. The breaking point came during Emma's engagement party. 20 family members gathered in our backyard to celebrate love and future happiness when Vivian's safety patrol arrived for an impromptu documentation session. 6 HOA members with clipboards and cameras, recording our unpermitted entertainment facility, while my future son-in-law toasted 4 generations of agricultural heritage. That's when Vivian committed her fatal error. The hidden cameras captured everything: trespassing during private family celebrations, photographing guests without permission, and Vivian clearly orchestrating harassment operations from her luxury command vehicle. Standing in my kitchen that night, watching footage of strangers violating my daughter's engagement party, something shifted from defensive survival to offensive warfare. They'd transformed a property dispute into personal violation of my family's most sacred moments. Time to detonate the legal landmine my great-grandfather had buried and aimed precisely at corporate predators like these. Pinnacle Development's final assault came with the overwhelming force of corporate desperation mixed with unlimited legal budgets. They filed simultaneous complaints with the EPA claiming groundwater contamination, contacted OSHA about unsafe agricultural practices near residential areas, and somehow convinced Fish and Wildlife Services that my heritage vegetable garden was destroying critical habitat for an endangered beetle I'd never heard of. The coordination was surgical. Every agency received identical documentation packages with professional photographs, scientific-sounding analysis, and urgent requests for immediate intervention to protect public safety. The smell of fresh legal ink filled my mailbox daily as federal agencies launched investigations that could shut down my operation permanently while appeals crawled through bureaucratic quicksand. But the real revelation came when my private investigator delivered a manila folder thick with surveillance photos and financial records that made everything crystal clear. "Dalton, you need to see who's really running this show," he said, spreading images across my kitchen table like evidence from a crime scene. The photos showed County Commissioner Bradley Hutchins meeting secretly with Pinnacle executives at an expensive Atlanta restaurant. Bank records revealed monthly payments from Agricultural Transition Solutions to a consulting company owned by Hutchins' wife. Email printouts documented coordination between the Commissioner's office and Pinnacle's legal team about expediting agricultural transition procedures in our county. This wasn't just corporate harassment, this was systematic government corruption designed to eliminate family farms through abuse of regulatory power. Hutchins had been fast-tracking Pinnacle's complaints while delaying or dismissing any farmer appeals. The fix was in at the highest levels of county government. Meanwhile, Vivian's ground-level harassment escalated to outright intimidation that crossed every line of civilized behavior. Her safety patrols now included off-duty security guards who conducted daily property line surveillance with military precision. They'd arrive in unmarked vehicles at dawn, positioning themselves strategically to photograph farm workers and intimidate customers. The psychological pressure campaign intensified beyond amateur hour into professional-grade torture. Anonymous calls came precisely every 2 hours around the clock, forcing us to disconnect our landline and change cell numbers twice. Someone was using automated systems to ensure we never slept peacefully, never relaxed, never stopped feeling hunted on our own property. Emma's harassment escalated to stalking behavior that triggered genuine fear for her safety. Strange men appeared at her workplace asking questions about her family's environmental violations. Her car tires were slashed twice in random vandalism that always happened when she visited the farm. The message was clear: abandon your family's heritage or watch your daughter suffer consequences. But Vivian's desperation produced the evidence that would ultimately destroy her entire operation. Late Thursday night, my hidden cameras captured her personally cutting irrigation lines with bolt cutters while wearing surgical gloves. Clear premeditation for agricultural sabotage. She'd moved beyond directing harassment to committing felony property destruction with her own manicured hands. The footage was devastating, Vivian methodically destroying infrastructure while talking on her phone, presumably coordinating with handlers who'd ordered direct action when legal pressure wasn't working fast enough. Her privileged suburban entitlement had devolved into criminal behavior that federal agricultural protection laws punish with serious prison time. Friday morning brought Pinnacle's ultimate desperation move. They announced plans to condemn my property under eminent domain for community health and safety. The county commission scheduled an emergency session to vote on forced acquisition, with Commissioner Hutchins presenting urgent public welfare concerns that required immediate government intervention. The eminent domain petition was accompanied by a media blitz that would have impressed political campaign managers. Professional protesters appeared outside the courthouse with signs about agricultural pollution and protecting our children.
Dear child,
Local television received anonymous tips about environmental disasters being covered up by corrupt agricultural interests. Regional newspapers suddenly published editorials about the difficult but necessary transition from outdated farming practices to modern residential development. The messaging was too coordinated, too professional, too expensive to be grassroots community concern. This was corporate warfare disguised as citizen activism. But Pinnacle had finally overplayed their hand completely. By involving corrupt government officials in systematic agricultural harassment, they'd transformed a civil property dispute into a federal conspiracy case with racketeering implications. Their own documentation would become evidence in criminal prosecutions that could destroy careers and send people to federal prison. My agricultural law team had been quietly building relationships with federal investigators who specialized in corporate agricultural interference cases. The FBI's white-collar crime division was already monitoring agricultural transition solutions across multiple states, and our documented evidence provided the missing pieces for a major federal investigation. Standing in my kitchen that Friday evening, surrounded by 3 months of perfect documentation showing systematic corporate harassment, government corruption, and criminal conspiracy to eliminate family farming, I felt like my great-grandfather was finally getting his revenge against the forces that had tried to destroy agricultural families during the Depression. The irony was perfect. By escalating beyond civil harassment into criminal conspiracy, Pinnacle had activated federal law enforcement mechanisms designed specifically to protect American food production from corporate predators. They'd essentially called in an airstrike on their own position. Tomorrow's county commission meeting would become the public stage where 90 years of careful legal preparation met corporate arrogance head-on. Time to show these agricultural assassins what happens when you pick fights with farmers whose great-grandfathers actually read the fine print. The community center had never seen anything like Thursday evening's emergency county commission meeting. Over 300 people packed into a space designed for half that number, with local television crews setting up cameras, while the smell of nervous sweat mixed with the aroma of fresh coffee from overwhelmed volunteers. You could taste the tension in the air like humidity before a Georgia thunderstorm. Vivian had orchestrated this public spectacle perfectly, arriving with a professionally prepared presentation that included PowerPoint slides, environmental impact charts, and emotional testimony about protecting our children from agricultural hazards. She wore her tennis whites like armor, flanked by HOA supporters who looked like they'd stepped out of a country club catalog. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced from the podium, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, "we face a critical decision about our community's future. Outdated agricultural practices are endangering property values, environmental safety, and our children's health. The County Commission has a legal obligation to protect residential areas from industrial farming operations that refuse to modernize." Her presentation was masterfully crafted propaganda. Photos of my irrigation system labeled "unregulated runoff threatening groundwater," images of my heritage compost operation described as "biological waste accumulation," and drone footage of my organic fields presented as "intensive chemical agriculture near family homes." The lies were so polished they almost sounded believable. Commissioner Hutchins nodded gravely throughout her presentation, playing his role in this choreographed performance. "Mrs. Hartwell, the Commission appreciates your thorough documentation of these serious public safety concerns. We must act decisively to protect our community." When called to respond, I approached the microphone with a folder under my arm and the calm demeanor of someone holding 4 aces in a poker game. The crowd expected a desperate farmer making emotional pleas about family heritage. They were about to witness something entirely different. "Thank you for this opportunity," I began, my voice steady and conversational. "I'd like to share some interesting historical documents I discovered recently." I placed the original 1923 deed on the document camera, watching Vivian's confident smile flicker as the faded handwriting appeared on screens throughout the room. "This is my great-grandfather's original property deed, which includes an agricultural protection clause that makes Mrs. Hartwell's entire harassment campaign illegal under federal law." The room went silent, except for the whirring of television cameras capturing what would become the most watched county commission meeting in local history. I read the protection clause aloud, explaining how it voided easement rights if used to harass agricultural operations and triggered federal penalties for systematic interference. "But that's just the beginning," I continued, opening my evidence folder like a prosecutor presenting a murder case. "I have 3 months of trail camera footage documenting systematic harassment, property destruction, and criminal conspiracy to eliminate family farming through organized intimidation." The first video showed Vivian personally cutting irrigation lines at 2 a.m. while wearing surgical gloves. Gasps echoed through the room as the community watched their HOA president committing felony agricultural sabotage. The second clip captured her directing safety patrols to trespass and photograph private family gatherings. "Mrs. Hartwell isn't just some concerned neighbor," I announced, my voice carrying to the back of the packed room. "She's a professional agricultural eliminator working for Pinnacle Development, which has systematically destroyed over 200 family farms across 8 states using identical harassment tactics." I presented bank records showing payments from Agricultural Transition Solutions to Commissioner Hutchins' wife, email documentation of coordination between corrupt officials and corporate interests, and evidence that Pinnacle had been quietly purchasing distressed farmland throughout the county after manufacturing legal crises. "This isn't about zoning or environmental protection," I declared, feeling my great-grandfather's presence guiding every word. "This is about corporate agricultural assassination disguised as community concern." Vivian's composure finally cracked completely. She jumped to her feet, her voice shrill with desperation. "This is harassment of elected officials. You can't prove any conspiracy." That's when I played my final card, the recording of her phone conversation during irrigation sabotage, where she clearly reported progress to handlers about accelerating agricultural elimination procedures and ensuring the Briggs property becomes financially unsustainable. The audience erupted in shocked murmurs while Commissioner Hutchins turned pale as his corruption was exposed on live television. Sheriff's deputies, who'd been strategically positioned throughout the room, stepped forward with warrants for harassment, conspiracy, and violation of federal agricultural protection laws. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced as federal agents entered the room to serve papers on Pinnacle representatives, "agricultural protection laws exist specifically to prevent what you've witnessed tonight. When corporations try to eliminate American food production through systematic harassment, that's not just civil litigation, that's a federal crime." The room exploded in spontaneous applause as the community realized they'd witnessed the complete exposure of a criminal conspiracy. Vivian was escorted out in handcuffs while television crews captured the dramatic collapse of a systematic agricultural elimination campaign. Standing at the podium, holding documents that had waited 90 years for this moment of vindication, I felt justice flowing through the room like fresh air after a thunderstorm. My great-grandfather spent his life protecting this land from exactly this kind of predatory attack. Tonight, his foresight finally got the last word. And the legal dominoes fell faster than autumn leaves in a Georgia windstorm. Within 48 hours of that explosive county commission meeting, Vivian's entire operation collapsed like a house of cards built on quicksand. Her arrest footage went viral on social media, with the image of a handcuffed HOA president being perp-walked past organic vegetable stands becoming an instant meme about suburban entitlement meeting rural justice. Pinnacle Development's stock price dropped 30% overnight as news of their systematic agricultural harassment scheme spread through financial markets. The FBI's white-collar crime division launched a multi-state investigation into Agricultural Transition Solutions, freezing assets and serving warrants on corporate executives who'd spent years thinking they were too smart and too rich to face consequences. The settlement negotiations were deliciously swift. Faced with federal racketeering charges and criminal conspiracy prosecution, Pinnacle's lawyers arrived at Patricia Finley's office with checkbooks and unconditional surrender. $85,000 in damages for property destruction, lost crops, and emotional distress. Another $200,000 from Agricultural Transition Solutions for systematic violation of federal agricultural protection laws. But the real victory was permanent. My great-grandfather's agricultural protection clause was now legally reinforced by federal precedent, making my farm essentially bulletproof against future development pressure. The easement rights were voided forever, with no trespassing signs installed by county order. Future property transfers would carry the same protections, ensuring that generations of Briggs descendants could farm this land without fear of corporate predation. Commissioner Hutchins resigned in disgrace before criminal charges were filed, his political career destroyed by evidence of corruption that made front-page news across 3 counties. The county prosecutor announced a comprehensive review of all agricultural properties for similar protection clauses, triggering a renaissance of awareness about historical farming rights that developers had tried to bury. Emma's wedding became a celebration of more than just love. It was a victory party for agricultural heritage preservation. We held the reception under those same oak trees where my great-grandfather had planned his legal trap 9 decades earlier, with 300 guests, including farmers from 6 counties who'd been inspired to research their own property protections. The settlement money allowed complete farm modernization, new irrigation systems with backup protections, equipment upgrades that doubled our production capacity, and expansion into value-added agricultural products that created jobs for local families. The farm that Vivian had tried to eliminate became more profitable and productive than ever before. But the most satisfying transformation was community-wide. Former HOA members publicly apologized for participating in harassment campaigns, with new leadership focused on legitimate neighborhood improvement rather than agricultural elimination. A joint community garden project was announced, bridging the development and farm with shared growing spaces that taught suburban families where food actually comes from. The Rural Heritage Protection Fund scholarship program I established helps small farmers facing similar development pressure harassment. Legal assistance for agricultural families, research funding for historical property protections, and a template for fighting corporate agricultural elimination campaigns. What started as one farm survival battle became a model for protecting American agricultural heritage. Documentary filmmaker Sarah Martinez completed her feature film about rural gentrification conflicts, with our case becoming the centerpiece example of how historical legal protections can defeat modern corporate predation. Agricultural law schools now use our documentation as a teaching example for students learning to protect farming families from systematic harassment. The federal government strengthened enforcement of agricultural protection statutes, with enhanced penalties for false environmental complaints against legitimate farming operations. State legislatures across the region passed additional protections inspired by our successful defense, creating legal frameworks that make agricultural harassment campaigns financially and legally impossible. Standing in those same fields where Vivian's tire ruts once destroyed my tomato plants, watching families from the development purchase fresh produce at our expanded farm stand, I felt the deep satisfaction of justice served across generations. My great-grandfather's foresight had protected not just our family, but an entire way of life that corporate predators had tried to eliminate. Emma's children now play in the same dirt where their great-great-grandfather planted seeds of legal protection that bloomed into victory 90 years later. The historical marker installed by the county commemorates the agricultural protection clause that saved family farming in our region. So here's my challenge to you. Share your worst HOA nightmare story in the comments. I'll help you research your own legal protections. And subscribe for more David versus Goliath justice stories where homework and heritage defeat corporate bullies every single time. Next week, how a retired librarian used a 200-year-old water rights clause to shut down her neighbor's illegal swimming pool empire. You won't believe what she found in the courthouse basement.
Thanks for hanging out with us on HOA Stories, where the HOA Karens meet their match. If this story had you cheering or cringing, go ahead and like the video, drop a comment with your reaction, and hit subscribe so you're ready for the next wild HOA tale.